Close your eyes for a moment and imagine a vast, silent forest. Beneath the soil, hidden from sight, lies a tiny seed. To the untrained eye, it appears lifeless, insignificant, just another grain in the dirt. But within that seed rests a quiet miracle, the potential to break through the darkness, to rise toward the light, and to become something greater than anyone could have imagined. This is not just the story of a seed in the earth. It is the story of you, of me, of every human being who has ever walked this path of life. Somewhere deep within us lies what ancient teachings call the Buddha nature, the seed of awakening. It is not something we must go outside to find. It is already here, resting in the stillness of our own heart. And yet, for most of us, this seed remains forgotten, buried under the weight of worries, ambition, and fear. We chase after things that promise happiness but rarely pause to ask, what is the source of true peace? What if it has been inside us all along? Life has a way of distracting us. We wake each morning and rush into the storm of tasks, desires, and endless noise. We measure ourselves by success or failure, by approval or rejection, by what we gain and what we lose. And in that restless chase, the whisper of the seed goes unheard. But every so often something happens, a moment of silence, a brush with loss, or a sudden glimpse of beauty that makes us stop. In that pause, we might feel it. A subtle call, like the faint stirring of roots beneath the ground. A reminder that there is more to us than this surface life of craving and struggle. Think about it. A single seed can hold the blueprint of an entire forest. Within something so small lies infinite possibility. In the same way, within you lies the capacity for compassion beyond measure, wisdom deeper than oceans, and peace that no storm can shake. But seeds do not grow on their own. They need water, light, and care. Left neglected, they remain dormant. Nurtured with patience, they break open, sprout, and transform the world around them. The path of awakening is not about becoming someone new. It is about recognizing what was always there. It is about turning inward and daring to listen to that quiet whisper, even when the world shouts at us to ignore it. For some, this whisper first comes in the depths of suffering. When everything we cling to falls apart, the illusion cracks, and we begin to search for something real. For others, it comes gently, in a moment of stillness, or in the warmth of a compassionate act that touches the heart. However it appears, the whisper of the seed is a call to remember who we truly are. As we journey deeper, we will see how this seed of awakening can be covered, how it can be nourished, and how, against all odds, it can bloom into something extraordinary. Like a lotus rising from the mud, its beauty is born not despite the struggles of life, but because of them. And so we begin here with a question, a seed waiting in silence, a potential waiting to be awakened. What happens when we choose to nurture it? The answer is not found in theory alone, but in the living experience of growth. In the chapters to come, we will step gently into that soil, peel back the layers of what keeps us asleep, and discover the light that has been waiting within all along. The seed is whispering. Can you hear it? Imagine standing before a still lake at dawn. The surface is so calm that it reflects the sky with perfect clarity. Yet if the water is disturbed by wind, by stones, by restless movement, the reflection shatters. The sky above does not change, only our ability to see it clearly. This is how the Buddha nature lives within us. It is not something we must earn, create, or import from outside. It is already here, as constant as the sky. It is our true nature, radiant and unchanging, even when our lives feel clouded with confusion or pain. The ancient masters often compared this nature to a jewel buried in the mud. The jewel never loses its brilliance, even when covered by layers of dirt. All that is required is patience and effort to uncover it. In the same way, no matter how many mistakes we have made, no matter how lost we feel, the essence of awakening remains untouched inside us. But here lies the mystery. If it is always within us, why do we rarely feel it? Why do we suffer so much, stumble so often, and mistake ourselves for far less than what we are? The answer is simple yet profound. We forget. Like someone who owns a treasure but never looks into their own pocket, we overlook the gift that has always been ours. Instead, we chase after temporary pleasures, believing they will complete us. We identify with the restless mind, the fleeting emotions, the fragile body, and we lose sight of the deeper self that cannot be harmed by time or circumstance. Every culture has stories of this forgetting. A prince who wanders as a beggar, unaware of his true heritage. A phoenix that forgets it can rise from its ashes. A lamp hidden under a heavy basket, its light invisible though it still burns. These are not just fables. They are reflections of our own condition. We are heirs to an immeasurable inheritance, yet we live as though we are poor. To remember our Buddha nature is to turn inward, to rediscover that steady ground beneath the shifting sands of life. It is to realize that wisdom is not something foreign, but the echo of our own deepest being. Compassion is not an act we force upon ourselves, but the natural fragrance of a heart that is no longer clouded by fear or greed. There are moments when this nature reveals itself unexpectedly. Perhaps it is the tenderness you feel when holding a child, or the quiet clarity that comes in a moment of deep silence. Perhaps it is the unexplainable strength that arises in times of crisis, when you surprise yourself by acting with courage and love. In these glimpses, the jewel shines through, reminding us of what has always been there. Yet remembering alone is not enough. Just as a seed cannot grow without nourishment, our Buddha nature must be cultivated through practice. Meditation, mindfulness, kindness, patience. These are the waters and sunlight that allow it to unfold, not to add something new, but to uncover what is hidden. To live with this awareness is to live with dignity and freedom. We no longer measure our worth by fleeting opinions or shifting fortunes. We no longer cling to every passing thought as if it defines us. Instead, we begin to trust the ground of our being, vast, luminous, unshakable. And as this trust deepens, something changes. We start to see others differently, no longer as enemies or strangers, but as fellow travelers, each carrying the same hidden seed, each struggling with the same layers of forgetting. Compassion naturally flows when we realize that beneath the surface differences, we share the same essence. The Buddha once said, "All beings are Buddha," not just monks or saints, not just the wise or the pure, all beings. This truth is both humbling and liberating. It means that awakening is not reserved for a chosen few. It is the birthright of every living soul. So the question is not whether the Buddha nature exists within us, it does. The question is, will we dare to look for it? Will we pause long enough to see past the restless waves on the surface, to rediscover the still, clear lake beneath? Because when we do, a new way of seeing begins. Life no longer feels like a desperate chase after fleeting shadows. Instead, it becomes a journey of uncovering, of remembering, of slowly allowing the jewel to shine through. And as the jewel glimmers, another truth begins to unfold, that what hides it, what clouds our vision, is not permanent either. Just as dust can be brushed away from a mirror, the veils of ignorance can be lifted. What are these veils, and why do they cover our seed of awakening so tightly? The path forward will lead us into that very question. Picture a lamp burning brightly in a dark room. Its light is steady, warm, and unwavering. But now imagine layers of cloth draped over it, thin at first, then thicker, until the flame is nearly invisible. The lamp has not gone out. Its light has not weakened. It is simply hidden. This is what happens to our Buddha nature. The brilliance of awakening remains within us, but it is veiled by layers of ignorance. These veils are not physical barriers. They are habits of mind, distortions of perception, and clinging desires that cloud our vision. The first veil is ignorance itself, not knowing who we truly are. It is the belief that we are nothing more than this body, these fleeting thoughts, this fragile ego. We chase endlessly after identity, attaching ourselves to roles, possessions, and accomplishments, forgetting that all of these are temporary. Like mist over a mountain, ignorance obscures the vastness of our true nature. The second veil is desire. We live under its spell, convinced that happiness lies in the next possession, the next success, the next indulgence. But desire is never satisfied. It is like drinking salt water. The more we consume, the thirstier we become. The seed of awakening is not destroyed by desire, but desire keeps us looking outward, searching for what was never outside to begin with. The third veil is anger. When life does not unfold the way we expect, we lash out, sometimes at others, sometimes at ourselves. Anger is like a storm that muddies the clear waters of the mind. It blinds us to compassion, distorts reality, and feeds the illusion of separateness. Beneath it, the seed waits patiently, untouched, but the storm makes it harder to hear its quiet call. The fourth veil is pride. This is the subtle illusion that we are better than others, that our way is superior, our suffering unique. Pride builds walls where there should be bridges. It isolates us from the shared human journey, making us forget that every being carries the same seed within. The fifth veil is fear. Fear tells us we are small, powerless, unworthy of awakening. It convinces us that change is impossible, that we are defined forever by our mistakes and weaknesses. Fear is perhaps the thickest veil, because it makes us hesitate to even look for the light within. All of these veils, ignorance, desire, anger, pride, fear, weave together into what the Buddha called samsara, the cycle of endless wandering. They are like clouds drifting across the sky, making us forget that the sky itself was never touched by them. And yet, here lies the most important truth. These veils are not permanent. They are not who we are. Just as clouds eventually break to reveal the blue sky, so too can these layers dissolve with awareness and practice. When we begin to see them for what they are, temporary, conditioned, passing, we loosen their hold. We realize that ignorance is not the absence of wisdom, but the forgetting of it. Desire is not strength, but restlessness. Anger is not power, but a wound calling for healing. Pride is not confidence, but insecurity dressed in armor. Fear is not reality, but imagination magnified. The seed of awakening does not need to be created, only uncovered. And uncovering begins with recognition. To look honestly at our own mind, to see the veils without judgment, is already the first step toward dissolving them. Think of it like peeling away layers of an onion. Each layer may sting the eyes, each may bring tears, but with patience, persistence, and courage, we move closer to the core. The journey may be uncomfortable, but what waits at the center is worth it: clarity, peace, and a rediscovery of who we have always been. As we move forward, we will explore how life itself, often through suffering, can act as a great teacher. Because sometimes, it is precisely through pain that the veils begin to crack, and the hidden light starts to shine through. There is a silence that follows suffering, a hush so deep it strips away illusions. In that silence, something ancient stirs. It is the seed of awakening responding to the call of pain. We often fear suffering, avoiding it at all costs. We bury it beneath distractions, cover it with ambition, or drown it in pleasures that never last. Yet no one escapes suffering. It visits every life in its many forms. The loss of someone we love, the weight of failure, the shadow of illness, the loneliness that no noise can silence. To the untrained eye, suffering looks like an enemy, merciless and cruel. But to those who dare to sit with it, to listen instead of fleeing, suffering becomes a teacher. Its lessons are not gentle, but they are clear. It strips away what is false and leaves us face to face with what is real. The Buddha himself began with this truth. His first teaching was the recognition of dukkha, the pervasive unsatisfactoriness of life. Birth, aging, sickness, death, gain and loss, praise and blame, joy and sorrow. The wheel turns and none of it stays. To live is to encounter suffering, but the Buddha did not stop at that bleak observation. He showed that suffering can be the doorway, the first step on the path to liberation. Think of fire. Left uncontrolled, it consumes and destroys, but harnessed, it can warm, illuminate, and forge strength from raw metal. Suffering is the same. When resisted, it burns us. When embraced with awareness, it transforms us. How many people discover meditation only after their life falls apart? How many hearts soften only after being broken? How many awakenings begin with the realization that nothing outside can give the peace we seek? Pain, in its harsh honesty, points us back toward the hidden seed. Consider the story of the lotus. Its roots grow deep in mud, surrounded by decay. Yet the mud does not poison it, the mud nourishes it. Without the mud, the lotus could never bloom. In the same way, suffering is not an obstacle to awakening. It is the very soil in which awakening takes root. When we lean into suffering with mindfulness, something shifts. Instead of asking, "Why me?" we begin to ask, "What is this teaching me?" We discover that pain reveals our attachments, the places where we cling most tightly. It shows us the fragility of what we once thought permanent. It humbles our pride and opens our heart to the suffering of others. In that shared vulnerability, compassion begins to bloom. There is a strange paradox. Those who have suffered deeply often carry a depth of kindness and understanding that cannot be faked. Their eyes have seen impermanence. Their hearts have felt the rawness of loss. Out of that very brokenness arises a gentleness that can hold the pain of others. This is why suffering, though bitter, can be sacred. It awakens us to truths we might otherwise ignore. It turns our gaze inward, urging us to water the seed of awakening that has waited so long. But suffering alone is not enough. Left unchecked, it can harden us, make us bitter, or drown us in despair. The key is awareness, to meet suffering not with denial but with courage, curiosity, and compassion. To sit quietly with the ache, breathing into it, allowing it to speak. Slowly we learn that the pain itself is not eternal. Like all things, it arises, stays for a time, and fades. Beneath it, something steady remains. And as that steady ground begins to reveal itself, we realize suffering was never meant to destroy us. It was meant to awaken us. Life will continue to bring its storms, but now, instead of fearing them, we begin to see them as opportunities. Each struggle is a chance to water the seed, to grow roots deeper and stronger, to stretch upward toward the light. From here, a new question emerges. If suffering calls us to awaken, then what nourishes that awakening? What practices, what daily choices can help us tend to the seed so it does not wither but blossoms fully? The answer lies in the gentle art of nourishment, in the sunlight of mindfulness and the water of compassion. A seed cannot grow without care. It may hold infinite potential, but without water, light, and nourishment, it will remain dormant, locked in silence beneath the soil. The same is true of the seed of awakening within us. It is already there waiting, but it needs our attention to come alive. So how do we nourish it? How do we create the right conditions for this hidden potential to unfold? The answer is both simple and profound: mindfulness and compassion. Mindfulness is like sunlight. It illuminates what is hidden, warms what is cold, and helps life grow in directions unseen. To practice mindfulness is to turn our attention fully to the present moment, not as a fleeting point in time, but as the very ground of life. Too often we live in the past, tangled in regrets, or in the future, anxious about what might come. Mindfulness invites us back to the only place where life actually happens, here and now. When we eat mindfully, we taste more than food. We taste the rain, the soil, the farmer's labor, the miracle of life continuing in every bite. When we breathe mindfully, we feel the gift of simply being alive, breath flowing in, breath flowing out, an anchor in the middle of life's storms. Each act of mindfulness waters the seed of awakening. It reminds us that peace is not something we chase. It is something we return to. With each moment of awareness, the seed within begins to stir, roots quietly spreading into the soil of our being. And then there is compassion, the gentle water that softens even the hardest ground. Compassion is more than kindness. It is the natural response of an awakened heart. It begins with ourselves. Too often we speak to our own minds with harshness. I am not enough. I should be better. I am broken. Compassion dissolves this inner cruelty. It says, you too are human. You too deserve love. You too carry the seed. From self-compassion flows compassion for others. We begin to see beyond the surface of people's actions and notice the suffering beneath. The angry colleague is perhaps burdened with fear. The stranger's harsh words may hide loneliness. Compassion allows us to respond not with judgment but with understanding, turning encounters into opportunities to nurture the seeds in others as well. The practices that sustain mindfulness and compassion are many, yet all share a common spirit. Meditation, where we sit in stillness and watch the river of thought pass by. Walking meditation, where each step is a return to the earth beneath us. The simple act of pausing before we speak, breathing before we react, listening before we assume. These small moments, repeated day after day, create the conditions for transformation. But let us be honest, the work is not always easy. The mind resists, the heart forgets, old habits return. At times, it feels like watering barren ground, waiting for sprouts that never seem to break through. Yet patience is part of the practice. A farmer does not pull on the shoots to make them grow faster. He waters, waits, and trusts. The same patience is needed for the awakening seed. Over time, the sprouts appear. We notice that our anger softens quicker than before. Our cravings lose some of their power. We begin to feel at home in silence. We laugh more easily, love more deeply, and fear less often. This is not a sudden miracle, but a slow unfolding, the natural growth of what was always there. And as our seed grows, it does not only change us, it ripples outward. The peace we cultivate within becomes a peace we share. The compassion we extend to ourselves becomes a compassion that touches others. One awakened seed nourishes another, and soon the field of life itself begins to bloom. Still, growth is never without challenge. Just as every garden faces weeds and storms, so too does the path of practice. There will be doubts, temptations, setbacks, and struggles. These are not signs of failure, but part of the journey itself. So the question becomes, how do we face these weeds and storms without giving up? How do we protect the fragile shoots of awakening until they are strong enough to bloom? That is where the next part of the journey leads us. Every garden has its beauty, but also its battles. Seeds do not grow in perfect silence and endless sunlight. They grow among weeds through seasons of drought under skies heavy with storms. And so it is with the seed of awakening within us. Its growth is not a smooth ascent, but a journey marked by obstacles, setbacks, and challenges that test our resolve. When we first step onto the path of practice, there is often excitement, the freshness of discovery, the joy of stillness, the sense of hope that maybe, just maybe, we have found a way out of suffering. But as time passes, reality humbles us. The mind resists, old patterns return, doubt creeps in. Like a young sprout fighting its way through rocky soil, the seed of awakening faces constant struggle. One of the first weeds we encounter is restlessness. We sit in meditation, but the mind refuses to settle. It wanders endlessly, planning, remembering, worrying, judging. The more we try to force silence, the louder it becomes. This restlessness is not failure, it is simply the mind revealing its habits. But if we mistake it for defeat, we risk abandoning the garden before the first blossoms appear. Another weed is doubt. We begin to ask ourselves, is this practice working? Do I even have the capacity to awaken? Am I wasting my time? Doubt can choke the seed before it has a chance to grow. It feeds on comparison, looking at others who seem more peaceful, wiser, or further along. But the truth is, every seed has its own pace. A tree does not bloom on the same day as another, yet each reaches for the sun in its own time. Then there is laziness. The commitment to practice is easily shaken by comfort. The mind whispers, I'll meditate tomorrow. I'll practice when life is less busy. Days pass, then weeks, until the soil of attention dries out. Laziness is like a drought, silent, unnoticed, but deadly to the fragile seed if we do not water it regularly. We also face the storm of anger and impatience. When life challenges us, when others disappoint us, when progress feels slow, frustration arises. We may lash out or turn the anger inward, scolding ourselves for not being good enough. Yet anger is only another cloud covering the sky. When met with mindfulness, it too dissolves, revealing the stillness beneath. Perhaps the most subtle storm is ego. As the seed begins to grow, we may feel proud of our progress. We may think, I am becoming spiritual. I am wiser than others. This pride is a creeping vine, wrapping itself around the sprout of awakening and strangling its true growth. For awakening is not about becoming superior. It is about realizing there was never separation to begin with. Each of these weeds and storms can feel overwhelming, but none are final. They are part of the path itself, not signs that we are lost. A gardener does not despair at weeds. He pulls them gently, knowing they are simply part of the soil. A storm does not mean the end of growth. It deepens the roots, making the tree stronger when the sun returns. So too with our struggles. Restlessness teaches patience. Doubt teaches faith. Laziness teaches discipline. Anger teaches forgiveness. Ego teaches humility. Each obstacle, when faced with awareness, becomes nourishment for the seed. The key is persistence. Even when the weeds return, we keep tending. Even when storms rage, we keep standing. Growth is slow, sometimes invisible, but it is happening. Beneath the surface, roots are spreading, strengthening, preparing for the day when the seed bursts into bloom. And when that day comes, it is like witnessing a lotus rise above the muddy waters. Against all odds, the flower opens, radiant and untouched by the filth below. In the same way, our awakening is not born apart from struggle, but because of it. The very challenges we feared become the conditions of our freedom. From here, the journey shifts. We begin to glimpse what it means to live not in constant struggle, but in presence. What does it look like when the seed blossoms, when awakening becomes a living experience woven into daily life? That is where we now turn. There comes a moment in the garden when the seed, long hidden beneath soil, breaks through and opens to the sun. The struggles, the storms, the weeds all have shaped its resilience. And then one day it blossoms. So it is with the seed of awakening within us. When awareness begins to unfold, life itself takes on a different texture. What once felt ordinary now shines with quiet wonder. The sound of rain against the window is no longer background noise. It is a teacher reminding us of impermanence. The smile of a stranger on the street is not overlooked. It becomes a reminder of our shared humanity. Awareness turns the mundane into sacred, not by adding anything but by stripping away the veil of distraction that once covered it. Living in awareness does not mean escaping the world. It means inhabiting it more fully. When you walk, you are simply walking, not rushing toward the future, not dragging the weight of the past. Each step becomes alive. Each breath becomes a gift. In this way, awareness transforms even the simplest acts, drinking tea, washing dishes, listening to a friend, into moments of presence. The lotus is a powerful symbol here. It grows in muddy waters, yet its petals remain untainted. Living in awareness is much the same. We are still surrounded by the mud of daily life, challenges, stress, misunderstandings, but we no longer sink into it. We rise above, untouched, because our roots are grounded in mindfulness. This blossoming also changes how we relate to others. Compassion deepens. When someone speaks harshly, instead of reacting with anger, we see the suffering behind their words. When someone succeeds, instead of envy, we feel joy for their happiness. Awareness teaches us that we are not separate from one another. The boundaries we once clung to, me versus you, self versus other, begin to dissolve like mist in the morning sun. And yet, living in awareness is not a permanent state of bliss. It is not about floating above reality. There are still moments of irritation, sadness, or fear. But the difference is this: we no longer become prisoners of those states. Awareness allows us to feel them fully without being consumed. Like watching clouds pass across the sky, we learn to witness emotions without clinging or resisting. This is the fragrance of the blossoming lotus, a freedom that does not depend on perfect conditions, but on presence. The flower is not waiting for the mud to disappear before it blooms. It blooms right there in the very midst of imperfection. So too, we do not wait for life to be flawless before we awaken. We awaken within the life we already have. And as this flower opens, something subtle yet profound happens. Joy arises. Not the fleeting joy of achievement or possession, but a steady joy that comes from simply being alive, from simply being aware. It is the joy of knowing that in this moment, nothing is missing. But the journey does not end here. The blossoming lotus is not the conclusion of the path, but the beginning of a new way of being. For when the flower opens, its fragrance spreads outward. Awareness is not just for ourselves, it naturally radiates to those around us. So the question emerges, how does this blossoming influence the world? How does the presence of one awakened heart ripple outward into the lives of many? The next step in our journey leads us there. When a lotus blooms, its fragrance does not remain hidden. It drifts across the water, touching everything it encounters. In the same way, awakening is never just a private experience. The seed that blossoms within us inevitably stirs the seeds in others. Our presence, our actions, our compassion all become ripples that extend far beyond what we can see. So often, we think of awakening as a solitary path, a lone traveler sitting beneath a tree, meditating in silence. And yes, the inward journey is deeply personal, but it is also profoundly interconnected. None of us walks alone. Every teacher, every friend, every stranger who shows us kindness or even challenges us, all are part of our awakening. Likewise, every step we take in awareness becomes part of theirs. Imagine entering a room heavy with tension. Then one person breathes calmly, listens deeply, and responds with kindness instead of anger. In that moment, the energy shifts. Others soften, the air clears. No grand speeches are needed. Presence itself transforms the atmosphere. This is how the seed of awakening in one person quietly calls to the seeds in others. The Buddha himself did not awaken for his own sake. When he realized freedom under the Bodhi tree, his first impulse was to share it. Why? Because awakening is incomplete if it does not flow outward. A flower blooms not only for itself but for the bees, the birds, the entire ecosystem. Likewise, our practice naturally matures into service, into a wish for others to taste the same freedom. This collective journey is not about preaching or convincing. It is about living in such a way that others are inspired, not by words, but by example. A parent who practices patience plants seeds of peace in a child. A leader who chooses integrity over greed plants seeds of trust in a community. Even the smallest gesture, a smile offered to a weary soul, a moment of listening when someone feels unseen, becomes nourishment for another's hidden seed. But let us not forget, collective awakening also requires us to see beyond separation. In the modern world, division often reigns, nations against nations, beliefs against beliefs, individuals guarding their egos. Yet when we look deeply, we see that we share the same ground of being. Just as countless lotus flowers grow from the same muddy pond, all beings arise from the same web of interdependence. To awaken collectively is to remember this truth, to live as though no one's liberation is complete until all can breathe in freedom. This does not mean we must save the world overnight. It means tending to the soil around us wherever we are. Our families, our workplaces, our communities. These are the fields where collective awakening begins. Each act of compassion, each moment of awareness, is like a raindrop nourishing not just one seed but many. And so, the path of awakening gradually shifts from me to we. We discover that our joy is deeper when shared, our wisdom richer when offered, our freedom fuller when it helps free others. In this way, the blossoming of one lotus is never isolated. It is part of a vast blooming across the waters of existence. But awakening as a collective journey leads us to another profound question. What happens when we live in harmony with this interconnected truth? How does realizing our shared awakening shape the very way we exist together on this earth? That is where our journey continues. A flower blooms, but it does not stop there. It continues to open, petal by petal, changing with each day until it withers and returns to the soil, only to nourish new life again. Awakening is the same. It is not a single moment of light after which everything is finished. It is a lifelong unfolding, a journey without end, where each step reveals another layer of truth. Many imagine awakening as a final destination, a place where all suffering disappears and perfection is achieved. But the Buddha never taught it this way. He spoke instead of a path, a continuous practice, a way of living. To awaken is not to arrive at some distant shore and rest forever. It is to keep walking, to keep growing, to keep deepening into presence for as long as life allows. Each day offers new opportunities to refine our awareness. A joy that once delighted us may become an attachment we must release. A struggle we thought we had overcome may reappear in a subtler form. Old habits sometimes resurface, testing the strength of our mindfulness. But rather than seeing these moments as failures, we begin to see them as part of the natural rhythm of growth. The lotus, too, opens and closes with the sun. Its beauty is not diminished by this rhythm. It is defined by it. This lifelong journey also reminds us of humility. However much wisdom we cultivate, there is always more to learn. However deeply we understand, there are always blind spots yet unseen. Awakening keeps us soft, open, willing to be surprised by life. The moment we think I am finished, we close the door to further blossoming. But when we bow to the truth that growth never ends, every moment becomes a teacher. In this way, awakening is less about reaching a perfect state and more about living with a perfect attitude, an attitude of openness, curiosity, and compassion. We learn to meet each day with fresh eyes, as though seeing the world for the very first time. A sunrise is not just another sunrise, it is this sunrise never to be repeated. A conversation is not just words exchanged, it is this connection carrying the potential to heal, inspire, or awaken. And what of death? Does awakening end when the body falls away? In Buddhist teaching, the journey of growth does not stop with this lifetime. Each thought, word, and action plants seeds that continue to ripple through the universe long after we are gone. Just as the lotus leaves behind seeds for future blossoms, so too our awakening nourishes the lives yet to come. In this way, eternal growth is not merely poetic. It is the reality of interdependence, the truth that nothing ends, everything transforms. When we embrace awakening as a lifelong journey, we free ourselves from the pressure of reaching a final, fixed state. Instead, we learn to rest in the beauty of becoming, to delight in the unfolding. Every misstep becomes a lesson. Every hardship becomes a chance to deepen roots. Every joy becomes a reminder of life's fleeting but radiant nature. And so, we keep walking, not toward an end but within a living process. The path itself is the awakening. The growth itself is the enlightenment. As we near the end of this journey together, one final reflection arises. What remains when the seed, the lotus, the entire garden of practice has been seen for what it truly is? What is the essence at the heart of all this blooming? That is where our closing chapter awaits. The journey of the seed has brought us here, from the whisper of its first stirrings, through the struggles of storms to the blossoming of the lotus, and beyond into the endless unfolding of awakening. And now, as we arrive at the final reflection, one truth shines clearly. The great awakening is not something far away, not a destination beyond reach. It is here now, pulsing in the rhythm of every breath, waiting in the stillness of every moment. We have spoken of the seed within, of the veils that cover it, of the storms that test it, and of the blossoms that arise when it is nourished. But the essence of awakening is simpler than all of this. It is the realization that nothing was ever missing. The seed, the soil, the storms, the flower, they are not separate stages, but expressions of the same life, the same truth. To awaken is not to add something new, but to finally see what has always been. The Great Awakening is a shift of perception. It is the opening of the heart that sees the sacred in the ordinary. It is the quiet courage to face suffering and let it teach us. It is the freedom of no longer clinging, no longer resisting, but moving with life as it is. In this way, awakening is not an end. It is the art of living fully awake. And this awakening is not ours alone. Just as the fragrance of the lotus drifts across the pond, awakening ripples outward, touching lives we may never know. A single moment of compassion can change the course of another's day. A single act of forgiveness can break a chain of suffering that has lasted generations. The Great Awakening is collective, universal, infinite, because the truth of our being is not confined to the boundaries of self. So as we close this journey together, let this not be an ending but an invitation. an invitation to live with awareness, to see the seed within yourself and others, to tend it with patience, courage, and compassion, to let it grow, blossom, and share its fragrance with the world. The path is not elsewhere. It is beneath your feet in this very moment. Each breath you take is an opening. Each step you walk is part of the great unfolding. May you remember again and again that awakening is not a distant dream. It is the life you are living here now. And in that remembering, may the lotus of your heart bloom without end. And if these reflections touch something within you, let this not be the end of your journey. Allow the seed of wisdom to keep growing. If this resonated with you, I invite you to subscribe to Zen Buddhism Wisdom, where we continue to explore the teachings of the Buddha in a way that is simple, profound, and alive for our modern world. Your presence here matters. Every view, every listen, every moment of awareness you bring contributes to the collective awakening we all share. So, if your heart feels called, join this community. Let us walk this path together, tending to the seeds of compassion, mindfulness, and wisdom for ourselves, for others, and for the world. Until then, breathe deeply, live gently, and remember, the lotus blooms here and now.